If you guys are new to my channel, you may not know that I keep a lot of African cichlids. A lot of the videos that I've been showing recently have to do with like gobies, mudskippers, things like that. But I do keep a lot of African cichlids. My logo, Tazawa Tanks logo, is an African cichlid. It's the fish that I've kept the longest and one of my favorite fish to keep. Recently on an Instagram live feed that I did, a live stream that I did, if you're not following me on Instagram, make sure to follow me on Instagram. It's Tazawa_Tanks. But anyway, in a recent live stream that I did on Instagram, someone asked that I make a video talking about scapes for African cichlids. Well, they said cichlids. I'm going to make it about African cichlids because the cichlid world is varied tremendously based on where the cichlids are from and all different types. So there's African cichlids, there's cichlids from West Africa, East Africa, there are cichlids from North America, Central America, South America, etc. Right? So everything from an Oscar to an angelfish to a discus to a shell dweller to a Malawi Mbuna, etc. So there's a lot of different cichlids out there. I'm going to focus mainly on African cichlids from Lake Malawi, and I'll talk a little bit about African cichlids from Lake Tanganyika as well. So as I've shared, I do have a lot of cichlid tanks. I just did a kind of a rough count just in my head and down here in the fish room. I've got like 10 to 12 tanks right now with African cichlids in them. A lot of them being cichlids from Lake Malawi, peacocks, some small haps, some Mbuna, etc. And then I do have a lot of Tanganyikan fish as well. So I've got some Calvis, I've got some Julidochromis, shell dwellers, etc. I don't have any Cyprichromis anymore, but I do have Burchardi. But anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit about Malawi cichlids, peacocks, haps, and Mbuna specifically as far as scaping them. So it's really pretty easy when you're thinking about how to scape for fish from Lake Malawi, your Mbuna, and your peacocks and haps. I had to put the camera down. It was shoulder day at the gym today, and it was getting kind of hard for me to hold my little camera out there and kind of working on my burning shoulders. But anyway, so with Lake Malawi, with the peacocks, with the haps, with Mbuna, it's pretty simple. You have to just think about how the fish interact with one another, their behavior, and how to decorate your tank based on that. With Mbuna, it's pretty simple. So one thing to avoid with Mbuna is plants. For the most part, they are going to tear up your plants. One of the reasons why is they are omnivore with a leaning towards being a herbivore, so they will eat a lot of vegetation. They eat a lot of algae out in the wild. They will eat a lot of plants. So most plants do not survive in Mbuna tanks because they will eat them. Those plants that they don't eat, for the most part, will get torn up anyway. So they don't do very well with plants. Now you can do like some floating plants. I've had success with like hornwort as an example. Other people have tried like Java fern and it's worked well. But in my experience, Java fern gets ripped up as well. But anyway, for the most part, you want to avoid plants. In addition, if you if you try to plant any plant in the substrate, whatever kind of plant it is, cichlids will rip them out. And that goes for African cichlids as well as New World cichlids. So they will dig, they will move substrate around, make little mounds and nests. So anything that's planted in a substrate does not last. And that excludes some of the cichlids that I talked about earlier, angelfish, discus, etc. You know, small dwarf cichlids. They leave the plants alone. But when we're talking about African cichlids predominantly, plants don't work. The other thing with Mbuna that I've found to work well is to have a lot of hiding areas. So I like to do a lot of rock work, caves, things like that. You can use flower pots, you can do pieces of PVC pipe. All of those things will help in kind of creating a atmosphere or an environment, not an atmosphere, but an environment that has a lot of caves and hiding places. One of the reasons why is the fish like to go in those hiding places. They like to swim in and out of the rocks. Their behavior as far as swimming is different than that of the open water swimmers like your peacocks and your haps. The other thing that it does, besides allowing them to kind of swim in and out of the caves and hide in them, is it does break up the line of sight. What that means is if you have an open tank and one fish is here and one fish is here, if this fish is the aggressor, the dominant fish, and it sees this fish, it will go after that fish and attack it and chase it. Sometimes that results in death, or a lot of times that results in death. When you have lots of rocks and things that break up that line of sight, if there's a big rock right here and there's a fish here and a fish here, this fish can't see this one, so it's not going to chase it. It's only going to, you know, kind of focus on his own little small territory. So having lots of rocks will break up the line of sight. It also allows the fish kind of a place to hide and to hang out and get away. Now some people will say that if you put rocks in tanks with Mbuna, it does create kind of the behavior where they are trying to mark off their own territory. However, in my experience, it does benefit having lots of rocks and hiding places for Mbuna. With peacocks and haps, and I don't have, I do have some haps upstairs, but they're smaller haps. But with peacocks and haps, they are open water swimmers, so they need to have space to swim around, where the Mbuna kind of go up and down and around. The peacocks will go back and forth and kind of swim in that open water. With peacocks, they won't do well with plants either. Now they don't eat the plants. They will kind of pick at them and tear them apart though. In my experience, the plants just don't last in peacock tanks. But they do like open areas, so you don't want to have a lot of rocks stacked up, because what will happen is those rocks will get in the way of another fish. Now, if you do, have rocks stacked up, and it does kind of break up the line of sight, but ultimately they like to swim back and forth, and I found that having a lot of rocks in a peacock tank, especially when they're stacked up high, just kind of gets in their way. So ultimately you do want to avoid having a lot of rocks and decorations in a peacock tank. I prefer my peacock tanks to be open. If I do have rocks, I'll just have a few small rocks, just kind of more for decoration, or maybe I'll put some rocks down just in case one of the fish decides to spawn and I don't feel like pulling out the female, and if she spits the fry and maybe there's 30 in her mouth and one survives by hiding in a rock, that's fine. I don't want to deal with it. But for the most part, you want to have open space, lots of open space for those peacocks to swim around. As far as substrate, they don't need substrate, but it definitely does add to the aesthetic value of the tank. So if you like looking at a nice display tank, having substrate definitely does look better. It can also hide the detritus, the waste of the fish, so it makes it a little bit easier in between water changes as far as having the bottom of the tank look good. The other thing that the substrate will do is it does allow the fish to kind of go through some of its natural behavior. So a lot of times for Malawi cichlids, the males will pick up rocks and move and spit them out and kind of create these little pits and mounds, and having substrate allows them to go through that natural behavior, and it is kind of fun to watch. Now you can also get into 3D backgrounds with both of these fish. 3D backgrounds have been pretty popular going back to, well, I remember 3D backgrounds back in the 90s when they were kind of a thing back then even, but 3D backgrounds can add to the aesthetic value of the tank itself, and it can also add to the qualities as far as having some caves and things like that. Now I've built some DIY backgrounds before for my Mbuna and my peacocks. They didn't last very well with my Malawi fish. The one that I have in my Tanganyika tank is doing very well. The fish swim in and out of the caves that I built there. And then I did I did purchase a 3D background for my Malawi tank. Now, we did talk a little bit about Tanganyikan fish, and with Tanganyikan fish, it's kind of more species specific. So the type of fish in Lake Tanganyika vary drastically throughout the lake. So you'll have the tiniest little shell dweller to some enormous cichlids in there, and everything in between. There are fish that live in rocks, there are fish that swim in the open water, fish that kind of spend more time at the surface in groups, fish that spend more time near the bottom of the lake. So it's a very, very diverse kind of ecosystem or habitat for the fish from Lake Tanganyika. So it's very specific to those fish. The fish that I keep are more rock-dwelling and shell-dwelling cichlids. So all the fish that I have from Lake Tanganyika like to spend a lot of time in and around rocks, or if they're the shell dwellers, in and around their shells. Now there are other fish from Lake Tanganyika that do prefer more open water, so that would be like the Cyprichromis as an example, which is more of like a schooling fish, or even like your Frontosa, which are going to have, they're very big, they do get very large, so they do need kind of large open spaces, and they don't like to be in, covered in a bunch of rocks as an example. So anyway, I hope that helps as far as understanding what Tanganyikan fish need versus what Lake Malawi fish need. Now, I've made videos in the past about how to care for African cichlids, those being the Mbuna, the peacocks, and haps, and I will put a link of that up here, and probably at the end of this video or something there'll be some kind of card or something, or some kind of end screen. But that kind of goes into more detail as far as diet and care for the fish. I just wanted to make a quick video because those of you that were on that live stream, you asked me to make a video about how to scape and set up African cichlid tanks. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. As I said before, to get more content from me, or to kind of get behind the scenes stuff, or be able to kind of get ahead of what's coming out, check out my Instagram, which is Tazawa_Tanks. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.